So if you're looking at political interest, if that occurs, public gets to pay a lot of the financing, then come up with incentives to reduce the amount of costs. Find ways to help you towards the solution rather than saying it's a problem. The problem is not transition, the problem is climate change. And we have to find solutions to fight climate change, not fight against the solution.
The following is a long, open conversation with Ganesha Pillai, the Assistant Director for the Strategic Planning Unit at SEDA, the Sustainability Energy Development Authority of Malaysia. We got the opportunity to sit and talk about many topics, like which are the renewable sources of energy, what is the market for carbon tokens, what is net zero, what is sustainability, and which are the plans towards 2030 and 2050. There was a moment during the recording that the lights were not working very well, making the video a little difficult to see. Nevertheless, the audio persevered, and later on we got brighter lights on our rescue. This is On the Lawn with FVR podcast. If you like this thing, feel free to like and subscribe and to contribute to the channel on the description below. And now, your featured presentation. It has been such a long week, isn't it?
Yep.
A lot of things to do, interviews from one place to another. So I guess it's time right now to start. 3, 2, 1. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of On the Lawn with FVR. Today we have Ganesha. Thanks for doing this, man.
Most welcome.
So a lot of people will be asking, maybe wondering, who is our guest today. So I would like to ask you, what is your story? So tell us a little more about yourself.
So I'm Ganesha. I did my bachelor's in mechanical engineering. I furthered my studies in renewable energy. Then I got a job in a solar company where we were installing panels onto residential homes. Yeah, as you know, going green is the right way. And after that, I joined a government agency called SEDA, Sustainable Energy Development Authority, where we focus not only on solar but other renewable energy sources like hydro and also bioenergy sources like biomass and biogas.
That's fascinating, because when I hear the word renewables, sometimes can be anything. So can we define what renewables is?
I mean, there's no proper definition for renewables as long as you have sunlight and natural resources, as long as you don't harm the environment from in terms of emissions. But then again, you get bioenergy, which is carbon neutral. I'm putting out a lot of jargons. Hopefully, I understand what
It's fine. It's fine. That's why people come here to this podcast to learn. They come here to learn.
Yep. So carbon neutral energy sources, but going green in terms of greening your sources away from fossil fuels to renewable energy sources is something that is the global agenda for us to fight against climate change and keep the temperature hopefully to 1.5. As you know, the latest IPCC report says that we are going towards 1.8 or possibly even 2 if we don't make any changes.
Oh yeah, I read those studies. But talking about studies, I would like to take the audience and myself back to those younger years when Ganesha was learning his ways. So how was growing up?
It's good. So in Malaysia, so we have 3 main races. We have the Indians, we have the Chinese, and we also have Malays, and we do have mixed breeds.
Okay.
So the beautiful part about Malaysia, you get a lot of holidays.
Okay.
And when you're studying in school, you don't necessarily. So during November, December, you have the school holidays, and that's the time where it rains like crazy because of the monsoon. And those are the times you actually spend time with your friends apart from school time, and those are the best times, I'd say. So growing up, you actually get I always feel that Malaysia has got the best food. I've been to a few different countries, but nothing comes close to home, as in you get a variety of food, different options, and it's really good. So yeah,
time to be a little controversial.
oh
Okay, so you say that the food of Malaysia is good.
yeah.
What about the food of Thailand?
Okay, so if you ask me in terms of the differences, there are pretty clear differences. Thai food is good. I'm not saying it's not, but in Malaysia you get a diverse choice.
Okay.
Yep. So in Thailand, it's good because of Thai food only. But if you come to Malaysia, you have the Indian food, you have the Chinese food, you also have the local Malaysian dishes. Yep, which you can choose from.
That's a very more compelling answer because usually we hear, and this has been a joke that's been going on around, that the way you can trigger a Malaysian is that I look at that, you can say you're eating a nasi lemak, and you can say, this food is good. It must be from Thailand, and everybody nods, and it's like, yeah, food from Thailand is good. But if you say the same, this nasi lemak is good, must be from Singapore. Everybody stands up and is like, what is going on?
I mean, if you come towards any country, right, you definitely have the rivalry between regions, but I don't see it as an issue. I think we should take it as something to celebrate about, right? So people think nasi lemak is from Singapore, but if you look at origins of it, it's probably from Malaysia. But there are foods which are really good, which is Singaporean based, like the chili crab.
Okay.
If you have tried, so that's really good. But I don't know much about that because I'm vegetarian. So that's one of the things that I heard. So they claim most of the food are from Singapore, which is actually not. It's actually based in Malaysia.
Okay.
So the other thing that you get is a mixture of food. You can have the other thing is the timing, right? You can get food throughout the whole day in Malaysia. It's not the same as abroad, where after certain hours your restaurants are closed. You either cook at home or you don't have any source of food. Yeah,
That's absolutely right. And also a big shout out to those Indian restaurants that I see there sometimes in Thailand or Singapore, even Malaysia. They're open 24 hours.
So mostly it's not Indian food. So
Okay.
you actually see what is known as a mamak food, which is a mixture between Malay and Indian.
Okay.
So but you do get all the different varieties of fried food. You get the fried rice, you get fried noodles, and all the other options like roti canai, thosai available for you 24 hours. So that's the advantage that you get in terms of either Malaysia, Singapore, or even Thailand for that sake. So if you're around anywhere in Southeast Asia, food is like food paradise, and if you compare in terms of prices, it's so much more cheaper. Yeah.
I agree. The access to food here in Southeast Asia is remarkable, and people who have been in other places, in other regions, it's really hard to get some good stuff after a certain hour and at a good price. For example, walking in Lower Manhattan to get a piece of pizza around 3 o'clock in the morning. First, most of the pizzerias are closed, and if you find one, it's gonna be at least $5 and beyond. So it's true.
The other thing is whether the $5 and although you're paying $5, whether it's as good as the pizzeria, which is normally open. But in Malaysia, you can choose which restaurant you want to go to, and you'll definitely get good food. Yeah, so that's the advantage, I'd say. And you have so many options to choose from. You don't just go to one shop which is open at a time. Yeah, and you can compare in terms of.
Now, those years when you were growing up in high school, when was the time that green bug bite you?
It wasn't in school. So, when we were all young, all of us had this dream of becoming something, right? What was your dream when you were younger? Do you have a dream?
Yeah, everybody has a dream. I remember Martin Luther King also has a dream. But yeah, growing up, just earn a living, maybe go to the stars, become an astronaut. I guess.
So you were you like the NASA scientist type?
Yeah.
Like those. So for me, I had a dream of getting this whole dream of world peace. But as you grow older, you understand that it's not possible to a certain extent because conflict of interest happen from even individuals, right? So if you're looking at countries, each country has got their own interests. So you can't come to a point where you achieve global peace because not everybody thinks with one point. Everybody is thinking about their own interests. Only when you think about common interests do you actually achieve global peace. So I'm at peace that I can't achieve global peace. Then you talk about world hunger and so many other issues that you can talk about. But in terms of my dream was towards school, high school. When I was finishing school, I was always thinking about becoming a pilot. So at my year when I was finishing high school, before I entered towards studying to become a pilot or a piloting school, Malaysia piloting school were closed because we had too many pilots. We were exporting our local talent.
Okay.
So we had too many pilots, and that's the year the government actually put up an opportunity for more airlines to be open in Malaysia. So we had 2 new airlines which were open locally. But then by the time the doors to piloting schools were open, I had to go for national service for about 3 months. And during that duration, my parents enrolled me into foundation. They said, do your foundation first, then go into piloting, so you have a source to fall back of studies. That's how parents think, right? So I did my foundation in science, but I didn't know it was foundation science leading to mechanical engineering.
Oh.
So while doing that, then I thought about why would I want to become a pilot? Isn't it same like a taxi driver? So
Wait a second, time out. You put a taxi driver on the same level as a pilot.
I mean, it's almost the same thing, only that it's, or you can put it as a bus driver if you want to consider it that way, but you're just transporting one person from one point A to point B. But of course, the risk involved and all that, that's why they get a higher pay, right? So that was the thought process at the moment. Then I was like, if I can't fly a plane, why don't I build a plane, right? So mechanical engineering gave me the option of maybe looking into doing aircrafts. So as I was completing towards my final year, I felt like maybe this is not for me, right? Everybody gets a point where they feel like, oh, they're stuck. So I reached a point during my final year project, I didn't know what I was going to do. Of course, becoming a pilot or an aircraft technician was interesting, but that's when I actually thought about why don't we do something for the environment, right? Since we are actually taking a lot of resources in, why don't we give back something? So my final year report was the reason why I chose renewable energy sources. My final year report was on ocean wave energy converter.
Oh.
Yeah,
Okay.
so at that moment you have, I mean, in terms of resource, you have 70% of water throughout the whole globe, right? And you have waves hitting your shorelines for free, but you're not doing anything about it. But unfortunately, till today, this was back in 2015, and this is 2023. Almost, it's going to be 10 years if you add another 2 years to it. But then the question was, we don't have a feasible technology or a feasible mechanism in order for us to extract wave energy, unfortunately. That's the current situation that we are in, but of course, if you think about it, it's a very high potential for us to develop. Yeah.
Now, in that journey that you realized not to become a pilot but to become an engineer, and then the skills of engineering to help this endeavor of a better world, how do you couple sustainability with engineering?
Okay, so there's this thing which I read, right? So it says that every innovator is an engineer of his field, but unfortunately, not all engineers are innovators. So in order for you to be a good engineer, you have to think innovatively. That's what I feel. So you have to continuously think of improvements. So if you talk about sustainability, right, people have this mindset where it's only in terms of environmental. It's not. So if you look at sustainability, it's a very wide scope. A lot of things in terms of business, there's sustainability, in terms of governance, and also in terms of social benefits. Is how you sustain a particular region or a particular country. So it's much more bigger than what we are talking about, not only in terms of environmental. Of course, there's a ticking time bomb in terms of the environmental goal that we have to achieve in order for us to prolong time in it. But apart from that, there's so many other things that you can talk about in terms of sustainability. And one portion of it, of course, is the engineering part of it, where you're looking at developing sources or technologies in order for you to achieve your particular target that you have.
It is very remarkable that you make that difference, because it's like people always wanted to be a hero, but not all people who can be hero can actually deliver.
But we are in a current time where you don't have to be a hero to become a hero. Sometimes you need to be a villain in order for you to become a hero.
Oh, yeah.
So I understand from what you're coming from, but you have to understand you have to do the bad things in order for you to, I mean, if you look at the current sustainability trend, right, even as a narrative, it's being a negative narrative, right? That's when people change. I mean, human mindset, we are fixed towards the negative instead of the positive. If there's a negative news and a positive news, we tend to read the negative news.
Yes, that's true. And this is something that we can extrapolate to what is going on in other places, and maybe here about things that happens with energy sources, or what is, let's say, taxations or subsidies. Talking with a friend, I remember that in Latin America, when you put the subsidies of gasoline out, then you have social revolt, because you have this friction, and then the people who were supposed to be the heroes trying to push better sustainable narrative becomes violence. So I see that point of view easily. Now, during your transformational journey from flying the skies to now saving the planet, where did you encounter SEDA, or did SEDA encounter you?
Okay, so while I was working in the solar company, during COVID, there was this thing called lockdown.
Okay.
So during the second lockdown, they said that solar installation is no more essential. So essential as in it's not important. So when that happened, the company had assets worth millions in the store, which we can't install on top of roofs and earn an income out of it. So the company was at a loss or stagnant, and they can't afford to pay salaries. So at the moment, the company decided that they want a 50% pay cut. So when you face those type of situation, you look for other alternatives. So at that moment, I'm blessed in that sense. SEDA had an opening, so Sustainable Energy Development Authority had an opening. So it was going from solar to all the renewable energy sources, and going from no governance to the company to be in terms of governance, and learning a lot more in terms of processes. So my learning curve grew even further. So that was really interesting in terms of that development and how those things took place. But of course, if you look at it, it was perfect in the sense that I was in solar, the most largest growing renewable energy source, and then going and exposing myself towards all the other renewable energy sources, and of course doing research on what other new energy sources that we can introduce to the Malaysian market as well. So it was really interesting.
So, with that in mind, the year is 2023.
Yep.
When you transition from being a solar man to almost all the sources, renewable energy sources. So, which has been the energy source you have seen the most complex to deal with, or the ones that is in contrast to solar energy? Which are the similars? Which are the similars and which are the
Very good question, but I'd like to take it from another perspective that each and every energy source has got its own pros and cons. Regardless, if you look at fossil fuels, coal and natural gas, you actually have got a lot more pollution producing, which is not helpful in terms of the environmental goal, and of course you're looking at decarbonization in long term. But if you look at renewable energy sources, most of it are expensive. I mean, capital high in terms of capital, but in terms of long term sustainability, they are helpful because they are not creating much emission. I would say low carbon because they do have emission when you're producing them. So solar is the easiest to install, and if you compare in terms of electricity, they are the cheapest in terms of maintenance as well, fastest and easiest to install, and you immediately get your energy source. So that's the reason why most people go towards solar. But of course, if you're looking at the other energy sources, if you're looking at hydro, you do have water issues where you got water rights issues. So it's down to the particular state of interest on how the approval process goes. And of course, in terms of approval, you've got a lot more approval compared to a solar plant where you're actually getting only the requirement from the asset owner or the rooftop of the owner, which is slightly different. So of course, you need to get your approvals done. You need to go through an environmental impact assessment and a lot more processes before you actually build your hydro plant. But hydro is much more stable compared to solar because you can decide how much you want to release in terms of your demand and your supply. Solar, you can't say tomorrow is going to be bright. You can hear the thunder right now.
Yeah, that's right.
So Malaysia, that's another issue. So we have clouds, we have rainy days, so you can't actually get the particular generation that you would ideally like. But it's too light intensity, so they definitely get a daily output available. And apart from that, looking at bioenergy, people still talk about carbon neutral source. So if you look at it a few years ago, even before we had fossil fuels or electricity at that time, we were already burning from biomass and biomass. So we used to chop down trees and produce wood, and wood we burn and then we release carbon dioxide. But that was absorbed by the trees in terms of photosynthesis, and then that's how the whole carbon neutral cycle works. But then we had to go and dig up for fossil fuels, and then we emitted a lot more than what we usually emit, so the plants actually can't absorb. So we have got a lot more carbon, which is damaging our environment at the moment. So carbon neutral works only that if you replant after you chop down. So that's how it functions.
Now, you mentioned after you replant, but it takes time from a little plant to become a bigger tree.
Yep.
So how can we assess the time element into this equation?
So if you think about that, right, in terms of time element, from a plant, I mean from a seedling to a tree, it takes a lot period of time. But if you look at in terms of plant to tree, it's much more faster, and there are also fast growing crops which can be used just for energy. But then it comes into in terms of land issues, where you are taking up agricultural land or you're taking up land which is used for farming. So you have to find a balance in terms of locations available for you to develop crops just for biomass and biomass reasons. And biogas has got its own advantage in the sense that you're actually capturing methane and you're producing energy out of methane, provided that you actually capture your carbon from the process, so you actually get a clean process in that sense. or when you release, the plant actually takes up your carbon dioxide as food during photosynthesis.
That makes sense. That makes sense. I remember more than a decade ago that the biomass narrative was getting stronger in Brazil, and for some reason it got stagnated because policies happen. And maybe that's another element that happens when you are trying to deploy energy sources.
So, of course, if you're talking about issues in terms of developing energy sources, I still feel the number one issue is still awareness among public SMS. I'm not talking about educated people who are aware of climate change and global warming. I'm talking about the people who are in rural places where they don't know what global issue is, and they tend to open burn because that's the fastest way for them to reduce their rubbish or their waste. So they tend to openly burn where they're producing emission unknowingly, which is not their fault. So the awareness issue has to be curbed first. When you have a society who is available, who is able to think and understand of the issue or the problem that they're causing from the actions that they're doing, that's when you actually have a society which is capable of moving or transitioning in this sense. So awareness is still one of the main issues. Then the second issue you're looking at is in terms of finances, as you said. So you have capital intensive companies or first world countries who have the funds, who are transitioning at their own pace where it could be done faster. And you have developing countries like Malaysia, for example, where we don't have the capital available in terms of developing to renewable energy at the pace that's being done in first world countries. So I'm not trying to put that aside, but of course the last part is of course political will. You have the right policies and direction available, you can transition a lot more faster. Similar thing which is being done in the US and also in Europe, like the IRA, Inflation Reduction Act, and also the Green Deal in Europe.
Yeah, that's true. I can recall, like during the oil and gas crisis, President Carter put like a natural gas bill to actually incentivize everybody in the early 80s to get leases. So instead of focusing only on oil, they can actually start exploring for gas. So next thing you know, they begin to apply more technology. But at the same time, we can also take analysis on the other side. People in the rural areas, sometimes they are going to burn because they don't have the infrastructure or even the capacity to deal with it. One example I saw with my own eyes, in the oil fields in Midland, Texas, people drill for oil and the natural gas, they cannot store it. They will burn it until recently because they realized, hey, wait a second, we can use some power generators and use the natural gas to get electricity.
You get extra value.
And they mine Dogecoin. I remember that there is even one oil well drill called Dogecoin 1. So they power an actual rig to drill for oil with electricity generated from this.
From the gas. So it's like a closed loop. That's good.
Yeah, it's a little cost intensive, but at least they managed to do that. So I'm happy that that thing is going on. It's still not a bigger scale, but it's getting there. Because also the cost of electricity happens to be very, very modest, which is also a question I would like to ask you. The cost of electricity in the region and also in Malaysia, how expensive or how affordable it really is?
Very good question. So if you look at the tariff price in terms of electricity in Malaysia, it's still cheap because we're getting subsidized.
Okay.
So electricity is being subsidized, fossil fuel is being subsidized, so you get very cheap electricity. So when that happens, people take it for granted. I mean, if you look at countries abroad, US or even Europe for that sake, they were born into an energy crisis where the electricity price was already expensive. So people naturally tend to save a lot more. In comparison to what's happening in Malaysia, we tend to waste a lot more because we pay electricity at a very cheap rate. So when your tariff price is low, you take it for granted. So only when your tariff price goes up, you actually look at alternative sources, or you look at energy efficiency, either in terms of best practices or technological improvement, in order for you to bring down your costs. So of course the subsidies should be removed by stages and then incentivized in terms of RE if you're looking at a full transition. So you're removing subsidies for oil and gas or fossil fuels, you're introducing incentives for renewable energy sources. So you get a perfect loop.
Talking about loops, this reminds me like a class of system dynamics about reinforcing loops and balancing loops. By taking out these subsidies, you have this extra money. I guess people who are informed will say, well, what do you need that extra money for? Or where are you going to put that extra money so they can collaborate? So, what are you seeing that it can be more powerful to allocate that extra money from the subsidies?
So if you remove tax from subsidies, as I mentioned, you can introduce incentives for renewable energy sources. So you're not, or another thing you can do is you remove taxes for renewable energy. And then, of course, if you want to make a carrot and stick, of course, you have incentives for renewable energy, and then you introduce carbon tax, which is being done in Europe, and also Singapore just started. So when you have carbon pricing, people who are emitting will start taking care in terms of their emissions, and they'll start reducing their emissions. So in that way, you actually hit your targets, or first you hit your NDC, your nationally determined contribution. Then you're looking at you achieving as an overall globe. Everybody starts doing the small bits. They're definitely developing and trying to achieve the agenda.
You mentioned these two keywords, carbon taxing and also carbon trading. I believe there is also carbon market, and there are also carbon players. Is this a new kind of economy, or how people can relate to this concept that can be a little abstract?
Okay, so carbon pricing, or another thing is you actually would have came across called RECs, renewable energy certificates, are normally trading. So you're trading the energy produced by renewable energy under REC, and if you're looking at carbon pricing, you're actually putting a price on carbon. So when you have a certain amount of reduction of carbon, you're actually selling the credits to another company who is looking to offset. I mean, there are two ways of thinking about it. There are some who are saying it's greenwashing in that sense. But if the terms and conditions of the particular credit make sense, then you're offsetting with decarbonization. You're not double counting or greenwashing.
Oh, okay.
So it gets a bit more technical in terms of how they use it. But once you're clear in terms of what your end goal is and how you're achieving it, then it makes more sense.
And that is more powerful, because when you put the clarification, all of a sudden you are avoiding what makes no sense and you are targeting what makes more sense.
And of course, you need to have the right authority to look through in terms of verification and before that, you actually look through in terms of rectification whether it's actually working, or you fix it on the spot in terms of rectification in order for you to make it right. So you prevent greenwashing, and also if you look at it globally right now, they're taking greenwashing a little bit more seriously, which is a good thing. Yep.
I totally agree on that. And talking in that line, there has been these three legal letters that generated a lot of controversy, but also generated such a huge industry, ESG.
Okay.
So, what is that, and how close or far away is from greenwashing?
Okay, so ESG, if done right, is not greenwashing. So, as we talked about earlier, sustainability. So, the whole sustainability program, one part of it is ESG, or people used to call it as so many different terms previously, CSR, you can call it ESH, or whatever terms, but right now it's being called as ESG. So, environmental, social, governance, which is broken down into three main pillars. So, environmental, you're doing things in terms of your sustainability reporting, reducing your carbon emissions, scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 later on. Then if you're looking at in terms of governance, you're looking at social and governance. So social, yeah, it's in terms of what you give back to society, or what your company can give back in terms of the social upbringing of your particular company as well. And of course, in terms of governance, your best practices, or how many hours of work are you actually doing the right things in terms of equality, in terms of providing women more job opportunities, or whether pregnant ladies after their due they still have their same job opportunity after they complete their term, and all that. So it's overall sustainability of the whole particular company. It's just not just three particular words. And if you're talking about greenwashing, of course, some company tend to cut the line and report their sustainability reporting, which can be amend when you have a particular authority looking into it. But then ESG has actually accelerated the transition in that sense. So the sustainability transition has gone a lot more faster, or energy transition has gone a lot more faster because of the ESG movement. That's been one big positive. But of course, in terms of the negative side effect of it, there are people who actually tend to misuse their sustainability reporting.
Yeah, I agree. Especially right now, I've been watching the news that a lot of governments around the region are trying to be more systematic of are these green sustainable claims make sense or not in order to limit the influence of greenwashing for the retail customer, which is in the end the people who pay the most.
So at the end of the day, if you look at it, however, whatever mechanism you come up with, it's going to affect the public the most because they are the end user regardless. So, and if you compare in terms of energy density, cities tend to use up almost 70% of your energy sources, which is a large amount. And you look at urbanization, it's proven that cities are definitely going to increase their demand. So the other thing that you can look into apart from whatever you mentioned is energy efficiency. Is for you to reduce your consumption, like similar to what UK has done. So they have implemented really well, and they have been reducing the amount of energy consumption. For a very big country which has got a lot of energy demand, they have been reducing. So a lot of other countries can learn from UK in terms of how they do it.
Now, a question, and also self-critique, will be that if we are going towards sources of energy that are a little more expensive at the beginning, in sake of sustainability, wouldn't that also make the poor poorer? Because if they don't have access to the popular or traditional energy sources, how can they sustain access to sustainable energy?
Very good question. And if you look at it, right, in terms of energy access, of course, most of them are still diesel generator based. And if you introduce something like a carbon tax, of course, they are going to be affected the most. But then, if you look at another source of how you can use renewable energy is microgrids.
Okay.
But of course, if you are looking at developing them from scratch, you definitely have to have the help from the privates or the NGOs who are actually helping the rural benefactors in terms of financing, because the government alone can't do it by themselves. So you need to have all stakeholders involved. After all, you're talking about the climate issue is not one particular country, it's supposed to be an overall global issue, right? So people should be working together rather than working against each other.
Uh-huh.
So it has to be a bit more of a collaborative effort instead of a standalone effort. So the only way for us to solve climate change, it has to be an overall collaborative effort. It shouldn't be one run by one company. It's not a competition. Climate change is not a competition. It's a collaboration.
That's true. And given that you mentioned access to finance, I believe you also saw in the industry something that they call sustainable investments. I remember visiting with Persis in Singapore. There was the SMU Sustainable Investment Symposium, and all the big banks were talking about how it's important to address, but at the same time, it's like you really want to put your money so you can get the better return possible. So, how sustainable investments usually work in this area of industry?
So if you're talking about what I'm trying to, let me just put another term to it. So sustainable investment could be also said as green financing.
Okay.
So similar terms. So if you look at green financing or sustainable investment, you must understand it's slightly different from your old fossil fuel investment, because if you trade commodities, you're definitely trading in terms of petrol, coal, and all of these things. So it's fixed, and you can actually decide how much you're actually coming out with. But you can't decide how much of energy you're going to produce from solar today. But of course, in the long term, during the purchase agreement, power purchase agreement (PPA), you actually get to see your returns coming in, and it's been getting shorter and shorter because not only efficiency in terms of product has been improving, also the return rate has been improving because you actually see them outperforming their previous predecessor about 20-30 years ago. So technology is improving, prices are reducing over time. So once a new technology is made available, the prices are high. Once it's commercialized, a lot more people start using your technology, any new technology, the prices would go down, and then they'll make economic sense. But the problem is banks don't understand how renewable energy works because it's something new, and of course, being humans, we have a tendency of going against new things. But now you can actually see a lot more banks moving into the green financing space, and also increasing their investments, which is a good thing. And also you actually get larger countries with better economics coming down and transferring knowledge and also providing funds to develop, which is really interesting to see the whole economics of things.
This is very fascinating because you mentioned that the banks failed to understand at the beginning what green financing is. And also, I remember 2 weeks ago with the collapse of the Silicon Valley Bank, a lot of the old traditional banks failed to understand how entrepreneurs do with the cash flow. So it feels like the financing industry has a lot of learning to do.
So you see, not only the financial side, but if you look at the whole energy industry, utilities, engineers, we had to transition, right? So when it's the whole, you're changing the whole dynamics of things, and humans being habitual creatures, we tend to go with what we know rather than changing, right? So if you look at the whole financing system has been changed, and you also see large corporations like Goldman Sachs, moving their funds towards renewable energy or sustainable sources, and they have also reducing or stopping their funds towards fossil fuel based energy sources, which is good to see in terms of energy transition. But then you also face issues in terms of developing your gas plants, because gas is still fossil fuel based. That's when it's a question mark, right, whether what Europe did was correct or wrong, because they say nuclear and natural gas is considered green. So I would say it's not, but it's down to each individual on how they see it. But natural gas is cleaner compared to coal, but it's not green. It's still a fossil fuel. You still have to dig up some place in order for you to get the gas.
Now that you mentioned about that, would you like to talk about LNG?
Sure, no issues.
Because from my background as a petroleum engineer, we always know that natural gas, if you cannot store it, you should burn it until you can convert it into electricity. Because it's like $2 per million of BTU. Sometimes you need a lot of capacity and a lot of infrastructure. And now we have seen a lot of movement in the Asia Pacific that LNG, liquefied natural gas, can be an energy source that a lot of people are starting to get more and more attention.
So if you look at energy transition, right, the main issue is not the petroleum side of it, but coal. Because of the amount of carbon that it's producing when you actually use it in your system. Of course, you're talking about when you're manufacturing or not manufacturing, when you're basically removing it from the ground, when you're extracting from the mines, you're actually producing a lot more carbon comparatively to natural gas. But natural gas is a fossil fuel. You're actually also producing carbon, but it's much more less in comparison to coal. So of course, if you're looking at the transition, you're looking at moving from coal to natural gas, and then natural gas to renewable energy. But right now, the easiest transition would be coal to gas. Then you're looking to move gas away, and then look at sustainability energy sources like hydrogen, nuclear, and renewable energy sources.
So right now we're buying time.
Of course, if you look at it in terms of facilities we don't have, in terms of technology, it's too expensive. I'm talking from a Malaysian perspective, right? So in terms of available facilities, Malaysia were once purely gas based. We can go back to that. But when coal came, it was cheaper. So market tends to move towards the cheapest cost. But renewable energy, on the other hand, it comes with the capital. It's not cheap, but over time it becomes cheap. You must understand the difference, right? So when you look at a cheap source, people go into it. But renewable energy isn't cheap, but over time it does become cheap. But it actually helps you in terms of sustainability. So the question is, are you willing to put up the capital today in order for you to get cheaper energy tomorrow and have a future for your generation? So it's a no-brainer in that sense. So
I remember people in the generation of my grandma, they didn't have those items with electricity. You had to put some coal, and now that you have access to that electricity, you can iron. So I see the systematic transition to happen over time. So it's like we need more investments in technology.
exactly like what you said, right? Your grandmother using coal and now you're switching it to electricity. That's exactly what's going to happen right now. So every industry is going to switch from thermal source to electricity. But the question comes is your grid actually clean? So your source of electricity, is it still fossil fuel based or is it renewable energy based? But most grids, unfortunately, at the moment, are still fossil based. So over time, you see the transition towards renewable energy and sustainable energy sources like hydrogen and nuclear once it's made available financially for the growing economy like Malaysia or the Southeast Asia countries, then it'll make more sense. But of course, over time, you're actually looking to develop your renewable energy sources, reduce your emissions from fossil fuels, and increase your sustainable energy sources. That's how it's supposed to be.
Absolutely. You mentioned about the grids and how sustainable the grids can be. One bigger question is usually about the maintenance of the grids. I believe that the grids in this country are maintained by the government or by a certain institution.
So it's being maintained by utility. So each grid system around the world is maintained by the utility of the particular grid. So it's not maintained by the government. Of course, the government oversees in terms of governing the whole thing, but it's maintained and developed by a particular utility company. And the more utility companies you have, the more competitive the market is, the more lower your prices will go, the more renewable energy will get installed to make it more competitive. I think that's my
Yeah,
answer.
that's pretty much covers the whole point. Now, talking about energy sources and liquid natural gas and also coal, there has been also a talk going on recently about the SMRs.
Nuclear. So if you talk about nuclear, previously you're looking at large power plants and amount of radioactive substances where uh, you can't dispose them, and then you have to store them up somewhere, and if anything goes wrong, you have a large amount of explosion, and you have radioactive substances thrown across the whole particular region, and you have to close them down, and there's nothing you can do about it. But recently, there's new developments in terms of what you said, small medium reactors, which are smaller and they produce large amount of energy. If you look at in terms of sustainability, they are one of the best energy sources out there, because the amount of energy the source that you're using is very little. In terms of the intensity of energy that you're getting is very high. So that's definitely something that I urge everybody to look into in terms of sustainability, because you can't go net zero without nuclear. If you think about the whole concepts of it, because of the energy density, you either use it as a backup reserve or you use it as an energy source, but you still need to have it in your planning.
So, in order to go net zero, we need nuclear.
I would say so.
And now that you mentioned, what is net zero?
Okay.
And I believe there are time frames, right?
Okay, so it's very simple. So if you think about it, there's this whole thing between carbon neutrality uh, and net zero, right? So carbon neutrality basically says that there's no carbon, or you have a neutral value which is zero, total equals to zero. But net zero is your offsetting, right? So your total renewable energy generation comparatively to the amount of carbon emission, the difference between that comes to zero. That's net zero.
Oh, okay.
Yep. So that's the slight difference between carbon neutrality and net zero. Most countries are following the net zero path, where they are looking at offsetting and also reducing the amount of emission and increasing their renewable energy sources. But over time, of course, the ideal goal would be 100% RE or 100% sustainable energy, where we got no emissions, and basically you have a better environment to be living in. You won't have much pollution, and your climate temperature will reduce, and hopefully prolong the lifespan of Earth and the people living in it. So that will be.
And when I hear those news about net zero 2030, net zero 2050, right now it's 2023,
Yep.
and 7 years away from that first goal, how far or how close we are?
So if you look at in terms of our climate agenda, we are looking at hitting net zero by 2050. Or that's the climate pledge which is being pledged by most countries due to the Paris Agreement 2015. And apart from that, we are also looking at in terms of companies going RE100 or net zero by 2030. So that's a commitment from companies or industry themselves in terms of their sustainability. But of course, if you look at it, the movement has been right, but it takes a lot more in terms of developing, in terms of capacity building, and also understanding the energy sources before developing towards net zero. And I honestly believe if we all work together as a globe, not only a particular country or region, we definitely achieve our targets. But provided that we all work together, because the finances and the countries who can't afford those finances should be looking at making partnerships or collaborations in order for us to achieve the particular target.
I see that. So it's always a collaboration. In the end, it's always a teamwork.
I mean, the best work is always teamwork, right? There's no I in team. And then there's always us in trust. So if you don't have trust and you don't have teamwork, you can't move forward.
That's true. That's true. Now, with that explanation, going from solar to all these sources, what do you wish you knew before entering in this role?
What I wish I knew. Very
Yeah.
good question. So after entering the role, of course, you get to see a lot more things in terms of how things function. But if there's one thing that I wish I knew earlier, would be the question mark towards why we actually converted from natural gas to coal. That's something that you can't answer, right? But because of prices, right, when it make economic sense, only then you transition. Why is it the value of economy or the value of finances more important compared to the value of nature or natural assets? So that's something that's always been a question. I haven't found that answer yet. So um, if you understand natural assets has got more values in terms of longer term sustainability of your whole country or your particular globe, but people still have the certain amount of greed in them in order for them to actually look for finances from uh, carbon incentive industries. So that's a question mark which I don't know. But one thing that I wish I know earlier is in terms of how utilities work and how the grid factors actually play in terms of you developing renewable energy. I didn't know that previously because for me when I was studying it was all why don't we just jump into renewable energy, right? But when you understand the grid factor, what are the factors that require in order for you to develop the particular grid, then you understand, oh, you need to have government movement, you need to have political will, you need to have the right amount of finances, you need to have people who are aware or public who are aware in terms of what they need to do in order for us to achieve a societal change. And then once that happens, you're actually looking at reducing your carbon emissions and also developing your industries. So it's an overall factor. You can't just name as one thing. But after being introduced to this particular platform, I got to learn a lot more and collaborate with so many people. And regionally, of course, you're looking at ACE, ASEAN Center of Energy. They actually have got a lot of research papers that they're working on, which really helped in terms of me developing my knowledge base. And also internationally, you also have IRENA, International Renewable Energy Agency, and also of course you're looking at IEA, International Energy Association or agency. They're also doing a lot of work in terms of transition, and also you have UNFCCC, UN for Climate Change Conference, and also other UN bodies which are actually moving in terms of us achieving our climate goals and also energy transition targets. And apart from that, you also have countries like US, Japan, who are actually coming over to help us in terms of capacity building, UK as well. So it's really interesting in terms of how the movement has been, and it's been a lot more faster compared to a few previous years. And hopefully, it takes a lot more collaboration in order for us to achieve our net zero targets at the end of the day. But another thing that I learned was collaboration is key. You can't do it by yourself because you don't have the right amount of resources in terms of funding. You don't have the particular policy. You need to learn in terms of how they develop their particular policy. Then you learn from that. Then you attract interest from private available funds, and then you look for foreign funds to develop your particular country.
That's remarkable because there is so much movement and so much money and so much technology, so much wisdom going behind this. Now, there will be always people who wants to take a pause and they will say that climate change doesn't exist. What words would you give to them that are still on that position?
So unfortunately, I sympathize with them because I understand where they're coming from because they're so used to getting what they're used to, right? So, but if you look at it globally, the transition only happened when disaster strikes. Okay, US went into transition after they had so much of forest fires, which you don't have to mention. I'm sure you yourself know. And if you look at Europe, they had to go through a particular war in order for them to accelerate their transition because they didn't get the supply of a particular thing from that particular country of interest. And then you look at countries like Turkey uh, and all these other countries in terms of Pakistan and their flooding. So you actually see climate change accelerating, some things which happen only in once in 5 years. You actually see them occurring every other week now to a certain extent. And then in Malaysia, you see 1 month's worth of rainfall falling down in a day. And then you say climate change is not real. It's either something wrong with me, where I believe there's climate change, or there's something wrong with you because you're not looking at the facts.
That's a good point
Yep.
because I remember those floods from December 2021. That was like one in so many years. And then all of a sudden, I remember back in March 2023, a lot of floods happened at the southern border of Johor with Singapore. And those were not supposed to happen as frequent as possible. Another point of view I remember was the 2017 Hurricane Harvey that was hitting the city of Houston, 50 inches of water. And they say, yeah, that thing is only once every 500 years. 2019 Hurricane Imelda came and put also water, but it was not as hard, but still. If we want to put, okay, those things doesn't happen so frequent, now they are happening more and more frequent, something is going on.
So another thing you can look into is in terms of people's inertia towards change, right? They are actually finding reasons not to change rather than taking it as a sign or a signal for change. So yeah, procrastinators are the best people in the world, right? So unfortunately, which is also a downside of human beings, I feel, because we don't have the ability to change as and when we need. We only change when something happens to us. So I just hope that most countries don't reject it, don't regret the reasoning not to transition earlier. And unfortunately, you also see islands flooding. These guys who don't emit anything or don't produce any emission or large amount of emission actually are getting affected the highest, which is not fair. If you look at industrial big countries in terms of the amount of emissions that they're producing, and the ones who are affected are the ones who are not doing anything. So you have to transition not for your country but for the rest of them who are actually affected.
And in that in mind, have to remember that in Malaysia they are neighbors of another country that has many islands called Indonesia, and they usually trade a lot of coal. I happen also to read that in the past there was something called confrontasi between Indonesia and Malaysia.
Confrontation.
Yes. So what was that about, and how the influence of the peace agreements or something led us to be dependent on coal?
So I'm not exactly sure about the confrontation, but Malaysia's large amount of coal comes from Indonesia. Initially, there was a ban, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh.
But you must understand, Malaysia's coal amount is very high. We use about, if I'm not mistaken, about 60 to 80% of coal, and then the rest coming from natural gas and very few percentage from solar and renewable energy sources such as hydro. In Malaysia right now, in terms of our energy to the grid in the mix, hydro is larger than solar. So of course, with that in play, if exactly a year ago when they had funding available from US and a few other countries for them to stop coal, the question marks arises for Malaysia: if we don't transition, what happens to our energy security? Right? Because if you are reliant on something which you are importing from another country, what about your energy security? What happens if, let's say, coal actually does get banned from being imported from the particular source? You are definitely going to look for other sources which is going to be more expensive. That's without considering carbon tax. So if you include carbon tax into that, your price of coal is going to go up. And of course, if you look at it, renewable energy sources will become cheaper. I'll just have a drink of water.
Oh yeah, it's good that you're mentioning that, because the point of having sustainability sources to secure yourself looks more like a matter of national security in the end, and also how you realize that how dependent you are from also trade negotiations with your neighbors. That is a quite remarkable point of view.
Because if you look at it from another perspective, right, in Europe, you actually have got very good interconnections. So if you look at, let's say, if the amount of nuclear helps support UK in terms of their energy demand, and UK's wind is supporting France when they have low amount of energy. But in terms of Southeast Asia, we don't have interconnections, and interconnection does help. Large amount of interconnection does help your sustainability, so you don't have to rely so much on battery storage. So whatever excess energy you have in terms of renewable energy sources, you transport it, and you have more interconnection, you actually save a lot more in terms of finances, and you're more stable as a grid. But of course, over time, it becomes cheap. right? But of course, you have to maintain your grid system, your interconnection. So that's another thing that countries could look into in terms of building interconnection to become more sustainable.
That's right, because I remember there has been always a lot of talk in the region about cross-border payments, collaborations, and it's like, when is going to be the cross-grid collaborations?
So it's been in talks for about 20 years, but of course it comes down to political will and whether countries could work together. But in order for us to achieve our sustainable targets, everybody has to work together. We have to look into every possibilities of increasing sustainable energy, not only in terms of interconnections, but also cross-border transfers in terms of knowledge or in terms of financing, and that's how you grow as a region, right? Yep. And over time you're actually looking at that being implemented. Of course, that's also a goal of ACE, as I mentioned earlier, Southeast ACE, ASEAN Center for Energy. One of the things that they have been talking about is the Asian Power Grid, ASEAN Power Grid. So it's an interconnected system among the 10 member nations.
That's a good reference, because the power grid itself is the one that allows to distribute all this energy that has been going along from one place to another. I know there are some startups that are working to do power grids in a sustainable way in rural areas, but at the same time they need support, not only from the financing area, but also institutions and also society itself. Now, as we are moving forward in this discussion of energies, I would like to ask you, what are you building out right now?
What am I building?
Yeah, what are you working on right now?
What am I working on? So I work as an energy analyst, so I focus on new renewable energy sources which we can introduce into the market, and policy developments. Two of the policies that we are looking into, as I mentioned earlier, is the Inflation Reduction Act and also the Green Deal by EU, because those are the two of the biggest policies in terms of support for renewable energy for climate change. In terms of new energy sources, we are looking at OTEC, Ocean Thermal Energy Converter. Very expensive, but very good potential that Malaysia has. We're looking at low wind speed, because Malaysia we don't have conventional wind. We can't put the large wind because our wind speeds are less than 5 meters per second. And we do have fast wind, but that's during monsoon, which doesn't help with the lightning and the rain. So that affects your turbines. And we also, hopefully Malaysia looks into nuclear as well, as I mentioned, SMR. And also we are looking at storage systems like battery and also pump hydro system, PHES.
Yeah, that's good, especially because as the world is evolving, more cross boundaries flows of energy will happen in the future. You really want to become like a hub of energy.
So if you look at Malaysia in terms of geography, we are strategically placed in the middle. So we are in between Brunei on the other side, Philippines, Singapore, and also Indonesia and Thailand. So Malaysia is centralized in terms of location. The question is, how are we going to develop ourselves in order for us to secure our future and also have another source of economic growth?
That's right. Economic growth and energy growth, these are positively correlated. Right?
Definitely they are interlinked, but there's also another research which was carried out where they looked at amount of carbon emission to economic growth.
Okay.
So two of the biggest economies in the world is China and US, and the amount of carbon that they are releasing is really high. So you have to have economic growth with sustainable developments. That will be the new narrative, right? So you're not looking at the amount of emissions in terms of your growth. You're looking at your sustainable developments in terms of your growth. You should change the narrative.
And change the metrics, right?
You should change the economic flow.
That's good. Actually, that's powerful. And I believe there are going to be a lot of papers discussing this in pro and also in cons.
But of course, if you look at it, there are so many other technological developments. You're looking at EVs and ICE being banned in EU. So a lot of developments happening, which should accelerate growth. As you mentioned, of course, there are a lot of studies being taken place. We should look at the implementing rather than just coming up with more studies, right? Roadmaps, blueprints.
Yeah.
Where is the implementation? Where is the action?
That's why a lot of people don't like the consultants, because they only wave their hands and it's like, yeah, those are the ideas, the strategies, but where is execution?
But that's the thing about consultants, that's their job. Their job is to provide you with the idea. Your job is to carry it out, because you're not paying them to carry out the job for you. you're paying them for them to suggest improvements. So it's based on your problem statement. You ask them for a solution, they did provide you with the solution. Why didn't you act on the solution? So companies should take more ownership in terms of their engagements, right? They are paying for it, but why are they not putting it into play? Or why are governments not putting it into play in terms of the research products that they've got? And the other advantage that they should make is in terms of looking into academics in their particular country or regionally, getting more data available and studies and understanding what technology could be developed in terms of IRL readiness level. So once you improve in terms of prototypes to technologies, you have new solutions, new technologies, which is continuously going to help you in terms of growth, provided that you include academic into your governance and into your private sector. So it has to be a tripartite, right? Government, private, and also technological partners from academic as well.
That's true. It's like the quote that it takes a village to raise a kid. Also, it takes a village to adopt new customs and traditions.
So it doesn't really take the village right now, it takes the whole world in order for us to adapt and transition.
It's a big village, right?
Yeah, a very big village. Yeah, so once you look at the big village, right, the big village are habitual people. We are tend to doing what we know. We should change. Change isn't easy, but change is necessary.
That's gonna be a clip. Oh yeah, that's true. Now, given that you have been exposed with a lot of things going on in Southeast Asia, I bet you have been also in other regions to see what has been the other kind of implementations that have been going
So
on.
if you look at regionally, right, the biggest region or the most transition or the most movement which is being talked about is always the European economy, and of course you're looking at the southern side, you're looking at US because in terms of their development, but in terms of Asia you're looking at China, and recently India are really moving really fast in terms of their sustainability, which is really nice to see. And then you look at ASEAN, we are the developing nations and we are also developing really steadily towards our targets. But also you look at countries which are a little bit more poor, like Africa, which is struggling in terms of financing. So a lot more efforts required for them to develop, but they do have real good resources. They've got good sunlight, they also have good wind, which should be developed. So a lot of issues concerning transition, but solutions are there for us to act upon. It comes down to political will again, whether each global leaders are willing to take the risk in order for them to transition. But I mean, as any transition, right, we went into coal, we went into natural, we went into oil and gas, we went to the industrial revolution. Now we should green revolution. We should look to the green side. We should revolutionize towards green technology, and possibly using of digital information like 4IR, digitalization, and of course if you're talking about development that you mentioned earlier, you're looking at energy development, you're looking at 4 main things: digitalization, decentralization, or and then you're looking at decarbonization, which is one of the main thing, and of course the last part of it is deregulation. So when you remove regulation or red tapes, that's when you actually see maximum growth.
Now that you mentioned these 4 big Ds of deregulation, digitalization, decentralization, and decarbonization, what are your thoughts about artificial intelligence and how this can play a role into this new energy revolution?
So if you understand, right, AI is not here to replace human beings. They're actually here to help you achieve your target faster, right? You compute everything, you put your data set inside, you get your results, you fasten your process. So AI is not going to replace human beings, but human beings who are using AIs are going to replace human beings.
Okay.
So when you have competency of using the particular available software or the available how do I say it, the particular AI tool, those people are basically going to build capacity and they are going to take over your jobs because you become uncompetent because you don't have the particular skill or knowledge in order for you to develop yourself, in order for you to take care of the particular AI.
That's a good point. Especially that nowadays there is a debate to either accelerate development or to take a pause.
So if you look at it, right, AI, if fully developed, then you're looking at Terminator. I'm just joking. So, but there are risks involved of things that you don't know, right? But if you never try, you'll never know. If you don't make mistakes, you'll never grow. Like there's a saying which goes, when was the last time you start something new? That was the last time you made a mistake. So if you don't make mistakes, you're not learning. But of course, in terms of development, you don't want to make a mistake of something as advanced as AI. Yet, you have to develop your particular facilities of all the other available developments first, then look into AI to integrate AI into your particular development. There's no point of going into something new when your current developments are not up to standard.
That's a good point. And talking about points, given that your experience has been in Malaysia and also in the region, I would like you to take a step back and reflect what will Malaysia need to be where they want to be.
So as I mentioned earlier, the first thing, of course, if you're looking at curbing the awareness issue, we should introduce education from either preschool all the way to university in terms of sustainability, climate change, renewable energy sources. So once people are educated, even if students don't know, they go back to their parents, and the parents don't know, they go to Google. When Google answers them, they are developing their capacity to understand. So when parents, society changes, they are developing their knowledge in terms of sustainability, climate change and renewable energy sources. Then you have a society which is aware of the energy that they are consuming and how much of pollutants they are polluting and how for them to reduce in terms of their particular emissions per capita, if you call it that way. So education helps solve the problem of awareness. And then if you look at financing, one of the things that Malaysia should look into accelerating is getting finances from foreign available funds, because the funds are available and so many countries are fighting for it. What are we doing about it? Why are we not the ones who are getting those funds? So we should act to get funds which is available, and also moving our particular budgets towards sustainable development.
Totally agree on that, because the point of accumulating wealth is not to make the money sit, but to make the money work for something else, as long as it's contained.
So I agree with that, but then the other thing which supports what you're saying is in terms of policies, right? So if you have direction and policies and law in place, then you can see the movement faster. So the direction is not clear in particular countries. So once the direction is clear, then you see privates coming in, you see foreign countries coming in to develop the particular industry of interest.
This is fascinating. Yeah, I can imagine an alliance between Kasana and let's say Sanali, which is the Saudi Arabia fund, because right now they are also diverting from traditional oil and gas. They disclose their LPs, and it's like they want to get more returns in more diversified portfolios. So it's true, the money is there.
So the money is there. The question is why are we not applying for it, right? So that's something that Malaysia should look into in terms of improving. So finances, once finances is already available, then in terms of development, it's just a matter of time.
Talking things are a matter of time. We happen to survive another rain. Is this usually in the month of March, the month of April?
So normally it's hot during this time of year, but of course climate change is something that you can't control. But of course, with that said, you don't know when it's going to rain in Malaysia. Yeah. So but it's much more frequent during the monsoon season from September till about the lights comes on. From September till about December, and it may prolong till about March, but not till this late. But normally it's hot during this time of year.
That's true.
Sensors actually work.
Yeah, that's true.
This is another thing that we should look into in terms of smart grid and also demand side response, and also having sensors to actually save energy.
That's right. This is actually very useful, because all of a sudden our little studio becomes the mothership. Check this out. It's just right behind you. It looks like a space shuttle or
It
something.
looks like we're in some spacecraft.
So this kind of technology, I believe it costs a lot of money to implement across the country, right?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, capital is one thing, but if you look at it, you're not using that much of light, and you're actually brightening up the whole place, which is really efficient. Yep.
Now, I can also remember that when I do my little runs around this area, the lights come up around 7 o'clock in the morning. and around 7 p.m. at night they shut down.
Or is it the other way around? They come up at 7 p.m. and then they go down at 7 a.m.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Thank you for catching up. Is that also like timed, or is usually somebody has behind switching the roles?
So normally I think it's some places they use sensors. So once it reaches a certain level of brightness, they shut off. Or usually you have a person who is controlling it, but that depends on your particular area.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's down to the particular developer in terms of how he develops his particular township.
Now, given that we discussed about sustainability and energy usage, I also saw that there is a lot of development on sustainable and smart buildings.
Yeah, so there's so many things that about in terms of Malaysia we got about 7 different things, 7 different accreditation that you look into. But of course, the global one is GBI, Green Energy Building.
Mm-hmm.
Green Building Index, GBI, and then you have so many other accreditation, but that's the main one. And also you're looking at reducing your carbon footprint from the building itself. So in Japan has got ZEB, Zero Energy Building.
Okay.
So what you're ideally doing is you're reducing your amount of consumption in terms of electricity, and you're increasing you're basically developing your consumption in terms of water, where some people have rain harvesting.
Oh, really?
Rainwater harvesting, and also in terms of energy efficiency, you're actually using your energy more efficiently in terms of light from solar, so you reduce the amount of light usage in terms of electricity cost, and also you're then looking at to introducing renewable energy sources. So it looks at consumption, energy efficiency, and renewable energy source, your energy pyramid.
That's a solid pyramid.
Yep.
I remember visiting this place in Singapore, the River Inn City, and every time it's like a hostel, inn, or whatever it is. And in the restrooms, they have usually like a small announcement saying that, did you know that Singapore gets water from these reservoirs? And it's like, they know how to harvest the water. Like, is that like a green water
So
system?
another thing that I went for a site visit when I was in Philippines, you actually looked into reusing the water that you flush out, or using a smaller flushing system. You don't need a 6 liter flushing system. So they're using a 4 liter flushing system, and they reuse the water for washing.
Okay.
They process it, they clean it, and also they reuse the water. So whatever water they wash off is being used for washing purposes. So your clean water only comes for you to wash it first, but other usage of water in terms of your pipe for washing purposes is being used from recycled water.
That also requires a
Plus,
different craft of
They
pipes,
also
huh?
have rainwater catchment. So they capture rainwater and then they use water from the pipe.
I believe there is also a saturation limit where you can actually reuse the water.
Yeah, because certain things, for example, when you go to the toilet, you can't use the water for other reasons,
Yeah.
so you have to flush it down. So, but the water that you use to wash your hands with, you can use that to flush down your work. So, still
There is that.
function.
That's true. Now, we are in a time that a lot of talent has been conglomerated to answer particular issues of sustainability. Do you think people need to focus on this more, or they should refocus on something else? Why I'm bringing this up? Because I remember during the lockdown, there was always the narrative that the virus made a lot of talent to focus on one single thing and not to focus on other topics.
If you look at it, right, how economics move, they move in terms of importance. So during COVID, the important thing was our health. So you have a lot more healthcare workers, you had a lot more volunteers helping in terms of your lockdown centers, and also for the distribution of your
Other shots.
yeah. So when you have an importance, that's where new industry opens up, right? So if you understand right now, we are facing a climate ticking bomb. So where do you think your efforts should be into the particular industry
To defuse the bomb.
to be more sustainable? So sustainability is your solution, right? So you're definitely going to see a lot more interest coming into sustainability. But unfortunately, we are facing a talent a talent reduction. You don't have much talents coming into the industry with knowledge. So we are not having engineers coming in, and unfortunately, a lot more guys are choosing climate-related topics or engineers. You don't have ladies coming into STEMs, science, mathematics, engineering, and technology. You need more ladies to step up. After all, it's called Mother Nature for a reason, right? The question is what ladies do make a lot of importance as well. We understand there are a lot of working moms. I'm not disregarding women for that. So in terms of equality, we need to have more ladies coming into the market to stabilize in terms of men and females getting equal opportunity of the particular industrial growth. With that said, there are really good female ladies who are actually developing a lot of things in terms of the current renewable energy and energy transition sector, but more would be better.
Yeah, more the better. And also, people, as you mentioned, talent with knowledge, with the right knowledge, the applicable knowledge. And also, something that I saw in other places is it's not for the sake of diversity of how you look, but also diversity of thought. Because you don't want to have like an echo chamber that everybody goes towards a certain narrative without saying, hey, let's take a pause. Let's take the other look to see what is going on without being ostracized or having those kind of things. That kind of diversity is also welcome.
So if you look at it, right, oil and gas, they have a lot of technicians in the oil and gas who could become assets towards renewable energy transition. Your drilling guy could become a driller for an oil and gas for a renewable energy source, right? And you have turbines from the oil and gas which you can use as turbines for renewable energy sources. So it depends on how you see it, right? I don't see it as an issue. The solution is already available. Transition is the solution.
That's true. That's true. Now, I believe that there are more topics to discuss about the green and sustainability efforts that are going on. SEDA is not alone into this.
So SEDA are just a government agency. We are governed by a government, the Ministry of Energy. We're not. There's no energy in it. The Ministry of Natural Resources, Environment and Climate Change. So you see, the agenda is already clear. Climate change is the agenda. So it's pretty clear in terms of what the country is hoping for, and the movement is pretty clear. And energy falls under climate change in that sense.
Yeah, that's true. And everything that can bring a more sustainable future is always on the table.
A lot more efforts is definitely required, but a lot more collaborative effort will get the job done faster and more efficient.
Yeah, especially because people want the job to be done today, if not yesterday.
But then, with that said, what were we doing yesterday?
That's right. That's right. It's usually about that, what we have done yesterday. So, talking about things that were done yesterday, I would like to take you a trip to a memory lane and ask you which was the most difficult trade-off you have done in your career. For example,
Sorry, I was confused.
yeah. This quote is by Thomas Sowell, an American economist, that says that we don't always get the best option or the best solution. We always find the best trade-off available, and we move along working with what the trade-off generates. So I would like to ask you, which was the most difficult trade-off you faced during your career?
Trial. So
With the trade-off, not a decision, but comes with consequences.
so far it's been good for me. I can't say I've faced much issues, but of course, in terms of transition or energy transition, one of the things that we're facing is in terms of the right action from political leaders. If they are making the right decision globally, you can see the amount of COPs that we had. This is the 27th coming on to the 28th COP, which is happening in the most oil-rich country, the richest oil-rich country in the world. The question is what's going to happen there is going to impact the rest of the globe. We have leaders coming in for these conferences. Why are we not taking actions towards changing? Why it's stopping the climate? What's stopping politicians or political leaders in order for them to achieve the climate goal?
I fully agree on that because at times when I see those news, it feels like it's like a retreat among the leaders. And it's like the common people will be watching that. It's like, where is my solution?
So you have scientists who are crying out. You can see the IPCC report. It's stated clear what we have to do, right? Why we're not doing it. So we know what to do. We know how it's done. It's clear. What's stopping? I mean, that's not clear, right? Why is it? So if you're looking at political interests, if that occurs, public gets to pay a lot of the financing, then come up with incentives to reduce the amount of costs. Find ways to help you towards the solution rather than saying it's a problem. The problem is not transition. The problem is climate change, and we have to find solutions to fight climate change, not fight against the solution.
That's right, because the keyword that you mentioned many times before was collaboration. As you collaborate everybody for the same goal, the solution gets done quicker and quicker. Yeah, if everybody gets the memo, it is done easier.
So it's not. I just like to reiterate and say it's not a competition. It has to be a collaborative effort. So it's not a one country or one person thing. It has to be everyone in it together. It's an overall global effort. In order for us to save, there's no point of the rest of the world going towards it and two countries come out polluting the highest, right? It doesn't work that way.
That's a good point. Now, given that you've been involved so much in sustainability, what do you do in your free time? How Ganesha gets new perspectives?
So new perspective in terms of sustainability, or what do I do
General.
during my free time? So I definitely spend a lot of time on LinkedIn and looking through other people who are actually much more influential than who I am. So I learn a lot more by that, and also go through conferences and free events which is available on LinkedIn. Apart from that, I connect with people and I get to learn from them, which is one of the best things about the job. I also have a life apart from that. I do enjoy playing sports. I play multiple sports. One of my favorite sports is futsal, and I also play field futsal, football and futsal. I do a lot of running. I do hiking. I mean, there has to be something that you do in order for you to keep your your sanity levels, right? So some of the things that I do in terms of sports are the things that puts you away for that particular moment to not think about the issues in hand. Then you go back and get to it, right? So that actually helps for me. That's how I see it. So you need to have a bit of work and a bit of life to have a balance.
The work-life balance.
Yeah.
That's true. May I ask you something about football? Which position do you play?
I'm okay in any position
Oh,
except
really?
for goalkeeper.
Okay, why no goalkeeper? Because I'm a goalkeeper.
I'm not good with my hands. So, but I had a dislocated shoulder.
Oh.
Otherwise, I could have, but not so agile. Maybe you are much faster.
Yeah, I'm glad that you bring this up because when we do goalkeeping training, sometimes when we have to jump and catch the ball, we are always advised to put the ball first and then the shoulder. Sometimes the momentum is so much that you have a lot of energy in the movement. You need healthy shoulders to land on.
Your shoulders look good.
Yeah, so far so good. And it's like, otherwise, if you fall with your shoulders first, you have higher chances to break your arm or your ribs. The same when you're about to cut a crossing, you usually jump and you have to lift one of your knees. Not
For protection.
exactly, because you need to protect, because the forward will always jump with their elbows, and the elbows cut a lot. I remember this play when we were doing some futsal. There was a crossing, and the very last minute our team was winning 1-0, and then Rodrigo went with all bad intentions to tackle me in the middle of the air, but because I had my protection with the knee, we both fell down. I keep possession of the ball. The game ended, and I stand up quicker. Just okay, the game finished. But I saw that he was a little lingering up. What happened? Because he went all in for the tackle, he couldn't protect himself, and that's something. There is always this kind of player that will go with another intention.
I mean, when you're playing sports, it comes down to intention again, like intention towards renewable energy or sustainability. Your intentions are really important. I feel when I play football or futsal, my intention is to enjoy the sport, to release the stress that I have.
Uh-huh.
So I enjoy playing the beautiful game, right? There are some people who enjoy hurting people, but it's down to their intention, right? Whether they really wanted to hurt or they don't know how to play. So it's down to the individual at the end of the day.
Yeah, and also something that you also saw in the field is that it's a friendly match.
You're not winning anything.
Where is the cup? Yeah, every time you enter the field, you need to see the cup.
There's no cup, there's no money, there's nothing.
They
But
will
of
say,
course, for me, I play all in, right? Because that's the only moment that you actually spend time to sweat. So, apart from the dirty challenges, you have to, play tough but not rough, right? You can body the person, but play tough. When you're holding the ball, protect the ball, but don't harm somebody else, right? That's down to the individual player.
because you want to see them coming back to play with you. That's another thing. That's a quote. Excellence withers when you don't have competition, and you don't want to nullify the competition. Then how will you excel? That's true.
With that said, sir, only with competition you excel.
That's true. So, with your background and with your skills, what kind of competition have you seen among the other institutions that want to solve this sustainability issue?
I don't see, as I mentioned earlier, I don't see climate change as a competition.
It's a collaboration.
I normally take that as an opportunity for me to learn from them, and if whatever I have, I'll try to part with them, because I look it as a chance for me to learn something new. But then that's again, when you look at the financial side of it, people are actually more towards, oh, it's my solution, I can't share it. But then you lose because that gives you a competitive edge, right? If you're talking about in terms of competition, but if you're looking at the developing side of it, you're actually failing. Only you can do it, nobody else can do it.
That's a good point. That's a good point. It's like you cannot always rely on everybody else when you are supposed to do your job. Yeah, that's a Bill Belichick quote. Do your job. The coach of the New England Patriots, like next person up, like do your job.
Everybody has got their particular task to do. As long as you do your task to the best of your ability, you know you're doing the right thing in terms of the overall picture. So do your task with 100%. I always say I always have these three things that I follow: love, passion, and purpose. Love what you do regardless, because I believe God is love, right? The next thing is have passion. Love the job so much, or have the fire in it for you to develop it, and have purpose. It has to be purposeful, otherwise you're wasting your time. So I always say passion driven, purposeful outcome, and love the journey, because it is a journey. Life is a journey, so enjoy every moment of it.
I agree. I could have not been enjoying so much this talk at the moment. I would like to ask you something, because a lot of people will be watching, and then there will be some young Ganesh watching this as well.
Young. Okay.
So, what piece of advice would you give to your younger self?
Only one thing: go and chase after your dreams. Sky is the limit. That's what people say. It's not true. There's a whole universe for you to explore. Ask in a sense that you always seek knowledge. Don't be afraid to ask. Most of us shy away from questioning. Only when you question, you learn. That shows you're interested. Don't get it wrong. It doesn't mean that you're not good. And of course, always give a chance for somebody else to talk in order for you to understand them better and see how you can work together. That's the only way you can move forward.
I cannot find a better way to close this episode. How can people find you?
I've got my LinkedIn account, or you can text you and find out for more details. At Ganesha, Ganesha space Pillai. You can find me on LinkedIn, or you can find me on Instagram, or you can message you to find out more details.
It's fine, absolutely.
Or I can share my link to you and you can.
Yeah, absolutely, anytime. Ganesha, I really enjoy doing this.
Most welcome.
So for people out there, please stay safe and dry, and see you when I see you. Bye.
Bye.